সকলকে শুভ সন্ধ্যা। I will organize an international webinar uh, on war in Ukraine. Where is it going? So today, our president here, Dr. Pradeep Basu, and speaker is Dr. Rolando Drummond Valadez. So I request Professor Pradeep Basu um, organize all the class.
Thank you, Prakash.
Please.
Like every other day, we first thank the audience, the organizers, Rashtrabigyan Charcha Kendra, and today's honorable speaker, Dr. Rolando Drummond. Rashtrabigyan Charcha Kendra is an academic platform. It has been functioning since during the COVID-19, and they are conducting mainly online webinars, but sometimes or many times they have also organized offline seminars. They conduct the lectures in English, but mostly in Bangla, which is a rare initiative, and we are thankful to the organizers. The organizers are Advocate Prakash Chakraborty, Professor Shomiran Das, and many others. They have been doing a lot of social welfare initiatives, like helping the poor students in remote rural countryside. They are giving free coaching, free books, and other stationery goods. They are also arranging for blood donation camps and medical camps, etc. They are giving the poor students books, clothes, food articles, etc. They are doing a very noble work, and I am grateful to them that they have associated me with their work. Now, about our guest speaker, Dr. Rolando Drummond is a PhD in geopolitics from Pisa University, Italy. He has been focused on Europe and the post-Soviet space. He has 15 years of journalistic experience, and he covered the beginning of the war in Ukraine, in the Donbass. Besides, he has been lecturer and researcher at different academic institutions. He has been a political analyst in different TV emissions around the globe, and he speaks 6 languages. And today, he is going to speak on war in Ukraine. Where is it going? We know very well that Ukraine war is going on since 2014. Nearly 10 years have already passed, resulting in huge loss of human lives and other lives, property, and physical disasters on both sides. And people are talking about the Ukraine war from different perspectives. There are lots of debates. Some people are in favor of Russia, President Putin, and they agree that Ukraine was getting associated with NATO and anti-Russian military enterprises. On the other hand, there are many people who support the position of President Zelensky of Ukraine, and they are criticizing Russia for having launched a very cruel offensive war. We would like to know about the causes, about the nature, about the prospect of the Ukraine war and its implications for world politics from Professor Rolando. Uh, Something I can mention as a prelude, that the Ukraine war or the Russo-Ukrainian war began in February 2014. On the one hand, a strong force, a civil force of the population of Ukraine wanted Ukraine to join the European Union, and they sided with the West, with Europe. On the other hand, another strong section of the population of Ukraine were pro-Russian, and Russia's Boris Putin, he complained that Ukraine is joining the NATO in order to launch a military offensive against Russia. These are the two sides: pro-Western side of President Zelensky and Russia, on the other hand, which has taken an anti-West stance. We know that Ukraine was one of the 15 republics of the former USSR or the Soviet Union. And Putin believes that Ukraine is very much to be identified with Russia, and Ukraine must not be allowed to enjoy any kind of autonomy. It must become a stooge of Russia because of the past history and the present compulsions. On the other hand, Zelensky and other pro-Western people, they think that Russia is trying to impose its commands over Ukraine in a very undemocratic manner. Now, during November 2013, there were some protest movements in Ukraine. Talks were going on about Ukraine's joining the European Union, but the then president Viktor Yanukovych, he was strongly pro-Russian. He wanted to prevent Ukraine from joining the European Union. And there was a very strong movement which is called Euromaidan. Maidan, we know in Bangla it means field. In Kolkata city, there is a big place, big field called Maidan. And Maidan is used, it has a Persian origin. It is accepted in many other languages. It means a square or a public gathering place. And this Euromaidan began to spread in Ukraine, demanding Ukraine's getting closer to European Union. So it was against the policies of President Yanukovych and against Russian commands, Russian domination. Now, the Euromaidan protests led to the revolution of dignity, and Viktor Yanukovych, the president, was ousted from power. And Russian troops occupied Crimea, an important part of Ukraine. It annexed Crimea after a highly disputed referendum. And in 2022, Russia launched a full-scale war against Ukraine, which is now led by President Zelensky. This is the introduction, very briefly. Now we will look forward to Professor Rolando for his insightful analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Pradip, for the introduction and for the invitation. I am always glad, to participate in all this academic effort that you're doing. I think it's very valuable, and these lectures that you are organizing. So thank you again. I will try. It's a very, very complicated issue, as everybody knows. It's not simple, and it's even more difficult when you try to get outside of the paradigm of the good guys and the bad guys, no? Because war is always a tragedy for everybody, no? It's not like they're like the good guys or the bad guys. It's like at the end, it's like the people is the ones that suffer, no? Meanwhile, the elites are the ones that are battling, combating, no? So it's like or organizing the war. So therefore, it's like my instance is definitely no pro-Western, but neither pro-Russian. So it's like I don't take sides in that sense. I try to explain the main features on how I will shortly try to explain historically and politically what were the main events that conducted that took us to the current position. No? So it's like it's a conflict that has been escalating a lot more of what many people thought. Nobody would think, 5 years ago that a war at this level was going to escalate to start. Even though there were some signals about it, and it's very dangerous because obviously it signals that there may be a new kind of world order after this conflict, no? Because it's like still we don't know how it will finish. There are many possibilities of which we will talk at the end, but it's a situation in which the world powers have escalated the level of confrontation a lot more to a level very close to what we saw in the Cold War. In the 60s or in the 70s. So that's why it's very dangerous, but it's very important to understand all the details that are regarding what's happening. No, so I will try in the presentation to shortly. The first part I'll try to explain the geopolitical background around Ukraine. To talk about the main political events between 2024 and 2022 in Ukraine very shortly, because it's a lot and there's like so just to have an insight of what's really happening, and then to mention some part of the opportunities that we had to avoid war before 2024, because there were many opportunities to avoid war. Who could be the winners and losers of the conflict? In the situation it's going on, and finally to conclude, where is it going? No, so what are some of the possibilities? Because obviously it will be important to see. Everybody's expecting what will happen in the Trump's presidency. At the end, is like to give us an idea of how much the U.S. is involved. Is the fact that everybody's expecting what will happen once Trump is president, no? To see what direction the war will take, no? So it's like either either Russia and Ukraine are both expecting to see what signals come out from the White House now that Trump starts his second term in January in 3 weeks. So obviously, so it's a very complicated issue. It's a conflict that is not lost, just a local conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It has worldwide dimensions, and that's why it's important to start first from the worldwide dimension, from the global dimensions, and then we'll speak also about the local things, no? Because it's a very complicated situation, the one that has taken us to this. So first, I mean, it's like obviously, there is a geopolitical a clash of geopolitical, let's say, projects surrounding Ukraine. Ukraine, in its origin, the word means land of borders. No, and this land of border has always been like a territory of many fights. Ukraine has been invaded by the Mongols, by the Tartars, by by many different countries throughout their history. It was like the main battles. I mean, the main suffering of the World War II took place in today's Ukraine. No, so there have been a lot of battles throughout history, and it's not different that until now there are different geopolitical projects that go around Ukraine. And also, it's like, so we will talk a little bit about this. We have NATO, the European Union, the Eurasiatic Economic Union, and the Collective Security Treaty Organization. So altogether, this gives us an idea of how many interests, for many different reasons, there is in what Ukraine from a different point of view. No, so for instance, let's talk about a little bit about NATO first. If you see, we can see in this map, we can see then what has been a NATO expansion. No, so NATO was supposed to be a military alliance created during the Cold War to contain the Soviet Union. No, it was after as everybody remembers, it's like there was the Warsaw Pact from one side and there was NATO from the other side. So there were two military alliances that were like contrasting each other. What happens that after the Cold War, it was expected that maybe, NATO, the goal of NATO had disappeared because the Soviet Union had disappeared. Nevertheless, besides the promise that was given to Gorbachev that NATO was not going to expand beyond its current borders, NATO continued to expand. No, so we saw that after the fall of the Soviet Union and a continuous expansion of you can see in the years 99, 2004, 2009, etc., until the recent years that Sweden and Finland became members, a continued expansion of NATO. Russia already trying to assure, to find some common security agreements, had shown some intentions eventually to join NATO at the beginning of Putin's first term, but it was refused. There was no interest from the Western part to find a collective security agreement with Russia. Therefore, Russia saw how many of the former allies were little by little, becoming part of NATO, and obviously that was like become difficult for Russia to process, but because for them it was like and it's interesting to know that part of the Russian speech is always based on the idea of that the enemies are surrounded them. No, so imagine it's like when you present that is like the NATO, that is a military alliance, is expanding little by little, getting near to the borders of Russia. Obviously, from the Kremlin's point of view, that was understood like a threat. No, the project always of NATO was to have four countries, that it was France, Germany, Poland, and Ukraine, like a backbone of like the base of all Europe, not of security, of all the security in Europe. And that's why for them, for the United States, it was a very important goal to have Ukraine in NATO in that sense. And there had been many attempts to do that. And for them to conclude to have Ukraine in NATO was like a way of assuring the backbone of Europe under their control. No, and so we have also, NATO is the main related to this issue, but it's not the only one. We have also the way in which the European Union had been expanding itself and had created the Eastern Partnership, and had been like throwing the possibility of many countries to become an eventual candidate and maybe a member of the European Union. We saw that, I mean, how the European Union had a big expansion in 2004 and another in 2007, in which many countries of the former Warsaw Pact, well, I mean, and the Comecon, that was the economic organization related to the Soviet Union, had become part of the European Union. This issue, even if it's not related, it seems related, because it's like, one thing is the Russia was never completely opposed to the, I mean, they didn't like it, but they didn't firmly oppose to the membership to the European Union, no. And it's like, and that was something. So the fact that it was a conflict for Russia was the fact related with NATO, no. So therefore, there was like a thing that there was this project, the EU Eastern Partnership, trying to expand, trying to invite different countries, and also and at the same time NATO expansion. Also, we had this both, and these both projects were clashing with Russia's own political projects. Here we may see what is until now the Collective Security Treaty Organization. It was a security treaty, like its name says, to try to assure cooperation between the member countries in case of an invasion, an aggression, etc. And also, it's like it doesn't have the same solid institutions and agreements as NATO, but still it refers to some sort of protection that these countries are needed to offer between them in case of a foreign invasion. Also, it's like, instead of, I mean, it talks about military assistance and many other agreements regarding security. So Afghanistan is not an observer anymore. It was an observer until recently, and but well, and Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Uzbekistan left the agreement. No? So this is just to show, like, that the end is like it's a different and obviously clashes, no, with the fact that in NATO, no. So we have the Collective Security Treaty by one side, and we have NATO from the other side. And from the economic part, we have also the Eurasiatic Economic Union, that in which I mean. All these countries like try to create some sort of economic arrangement for free trade and other economic advantages, not as solid as the European Union, because it doesn't create the institutions that are like so independent institutions in many senses, like the EU has, but still it tried like to have like a common market, a common to go in the directions of a customs unions, and to have more movement. No, it's like a more economic movement to in between the countries. No, so this was altogether the projects that were surrounding Ukraine in the sense. Obviously, both projects, one of the four of them, wanted to englobe Ukraine to become part of them. So it was already a conflicting situation. Ukraine was in the middle of that and had the strong influence of that. So altogether, this is like the main let's say geopolitical background, in a very short way explained. I will mention some main issues about Ukraine. Like now, we have like, for example, and this is important to consider, because after the fall of the Soviet Union, that it was a very complex. We have to remember that the fall of the Soviet Union had no planning at all. I mean, it was like it was the collapsing of the state. Suddenly appeared 50 new republics without a clear plan on how it was to be handled, how many of the things that were like shared were going to be treated, and obviously left many issues unsolved at that moment. No, one of the issues, it's important to know that all the nuclear armament that belonged to the Soviet Union, there were also nuclear armament in the territory of Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine, and therefore it was a big and complex negotiation that it concluded with the Budapest Memorandum, in which Belarus, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan agreed to dismantle or destroy the nuclear weapons they had. I mean, and to sign to become a part of the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. No? This was considered a main event in history. Well, in these countries, there was also a huge economic package aid by the United States to support this. The United States didn't want to deal with more than one nuclear power. At that moment, the United States had a very close relationship with Boris Yeltsin. Boris Yeltsin he received a lot of money from the U.S. and he had a lot of personal and different kind of economical arrangements with the U.S. So therefore, the U.S. thought it was easier to have to deal only with one nuclear power instead of several ones. So that's why the U.S. pressured to Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Ukraine to give back their nuclear weapons. No. Another important thing is that in 1996, because also after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was not clear the issue about Crimea, and we will speak about Crimea a little bit later. But I mean, it's important to say that as part of those negotiations surrounding Crimea, there was also the fact that at the end, Ukraine adopted a neutrality status in its constitution in 1996, and there was an agreement regarding the Russian fleet in Crimea in 1997. That was very important because Russia hadn't recognized until then Crimea as being part of Ukraine, because and we will explain the causes later. So altogether, this is what the part of some important events. We have in 2004 a series of color revolutions are called in different countries of Eastern Europe, not all in the post-Soviet space, but they were in Georgia, in Serbia, in Ukraine, of course, in 2004, in which there were a lot of protests against the current regime. I mean, in which they were not. I mean, they were protesting electoral frauds. I mean, there were very clear signs of electoral fraud. And there was mass mobilization against those rigged elections, but in which the U.S. Let's say gave a strong economic and political support to the movements to try to push them not only to become a struggle for democracy, but also to take regimes that could be in the direction aligned geopolitically with the West. So in that sense, the 2004 so-called Orange Revolution took the Viktor Yushchenko to the presidency of Ukraine. He was very related to. He had a very strong pro-US agenda. He tried. I mean, it was difficult because he struggled to have a majority in the parliament. So for him, it was very difficult to his government because without having a majority in the parliament, he wasn't able to do many things. No, so he was very limited, and he tried to force a pro-NATO agenda, but it was very conflictive and with the local oligarchs. And at the end, even though many attempts, to bring forward Ukraine to NATO, it was not popular at the moment. The idea of becoming part of NATO in most of the population. So therefore, at the end, his government was always blocked by the inside the political fighting. No, so there were other actors involved, Ukrainian oligarchs, and one of them related to them, and that also became a oligarch that had been already prime minister before, was Viktor Yanukovych. Viktor Yanukovych had a very close links with the main Ukrainian oligarchs, and that's why he became president of Ukraine in 2010, completely reversing. No, so it's like it's besides. I mean, I'd like to say some things about the oligarchs before a little bit. It's important to know in Ukraine. Yanukovych was, in that sense, more than because. In the media, he was usually shown as pro-Russian, but he was mostly pro-oligarch. I mean, he responded. He was completely related and depending on the needs of the oligarchs. He gave many cabinet positions and important positions in the government to people related to the main oligarchs that were his allies. He also benefited from them. I mean, there was like a chronic corruption at different levels, and but the thing is that these oligarchs, it's a very interesting type of oligarchs, because there were people that had amassed huge fortunes in less than 10, 15 years. I mean, some of them, to give you an example, were people that were earning in 1990 around $100 a month, and 3 years later, 4 years later, they were buying a bank. No, so it's like uh, this capacity of amassing huge fortunes, related, of course, with political power, had made the oligarchs to become a very important pressure group. I mean, it's like some some um, some figures say that in 2008, for example, they controlled 85% of the GDP was controlled by the oligarchs. No, so that's a lot. So therefore, like in this sense, um, the the oligarchs had a different phase. They were phase in which, for them, it was more convenient at the beginning to be allied with Russia, no, for many different reasons relating to energy and etc. But I mean, after a certain moment, these oligarchs that were controlling most of the Ukrainian economy decided that for them it was not profitable enough to be sided with Russia, and they wanted to be with the European Union. That's why, in that sense, that they started to notice that for them it was better to look like openness towards the European Union, and that's why they started to push for a change in the geopolitical orientation of the country, not to make, because for them it was more convenient to be with the West than what Russia could eventually offer economically. Altogether, in that transition, there was I mean, the Ukrainian political crisis of 2013, 2014. There was like, well, it all started when a violent crackdown against students after a peaceful protest. No, so the thing is that when that protest started, and I mean, not the protest, the crackdown, that created, because they had been at the end, there was the first protest had started, but there were still small protests that they were against the withdrawal of an agreement with the European Union. Viktor Yanukovych, under huge pressure from Moscow, had renounced to sign an agreement with the EU, and therefore there were some protests. No, so it's still not massive enough. The thing is that after some weeks, and when the protests were cooling down, the government, without too much reason, decided to have this violent crackdown against students, and that completely changed the dynamic of what happening, because that made a lot of people threw themselves into the streets to protest what was clearly a violent act of repression against political mobilization, and that gave the possibility of increasing a lot. I mean, it's like and changing from only some thousands protesting to have hundreds of thousands people protesting on the street, not only against the withdrawal of this association agreement, but obviously against they wanted to fought a change in the regime, because they didn't want to tolerate, I mean, the kind of policies that had been like the kind of acts that had been done recently by Yanukovych. No, so the protests were growing more and more and more, and it was taking a lot of them, and there was no until this moment no foreseeable political solution, because there were weeks and weeks, and like the obviously the mood was changing. The mood changed not only from an autonomous protest from students, but it changed also in which a situation in which there was a mix of locals, but we also with a lot of foreigner support that were, I mean, we can see in this picture that there were Georgian flags, but I mean, it's like there was money from many different countries. It was very common in those periods to find ambassadors from NATO countries actively speaking in the meetings. I mean, to supporting. I mean, the movement and the protest. No, something. I mean, it's like, I mean, what the show was the degree in which the Ukrainian state was in that moment. Because I mean, what country normally would accept that a foreign country with whatever sends the ambassador to speak in a meeting? No, it's like to publicly, I mean, motivate and promise things to the people. No, obviously, it was very confusing at that moment. The things related, I mean, NATO and European Union and the different proposals of who was there. There were different political actors. There were some extreme right actors. There were different the classical political parties. Some of them attached not the main political party that was in the government, but some other oligarchs that had sided already with the protesters. So it was still a very tense that increased the level of confrontation for several months, and until it started to become very violent. No, because the level of violence started to increase in the manifestations and everything. So there was a huge pressure to find a political agreement. This political agreement was first because the main demand was to the Yanukovych had to leave, and well, I mean that's, let's say, was like the main demand. No? So after a lot of mediation by Germany, Poland, Russia, there was an agreement in this issue that, I mean, that would allow the ousting. I mean, well, the Yanukovych would leave power on a negotiated basis. No, so there would be presidential elections by December. We're talking about 2014. There was going to be a government of national unity. All armed militias should give all the weapons. That is an important issue because there started to appear a lot of military movements, mainly related to the extreme right, that were armed, were not under control. So it's like a reinstate to the 2004 constitution. That is, in that sense, the 2004 constitution was more related to a semi-presidential type of government. And Yanukovych and the opposition political parties agreed. I mean, everybody agreed on this solution. It seemed that it will be like the end of, I mean, officially, at least today, it was the end. And that the political crisis would end up there. What's happened? I mean, what happened is like it was completely the opposite. I mean, the agreement was never respected, as Yanukovych was ousted the next day. There was an forced impeachment, but the impeachment didn't follow at all what the Ukrainian constitution established, and Moscow saw these actions as a betrayal of the agreements. No, so it's like so the new government took immediately an anti-Russian stance and included members of the extreme right in the cabinet. So that was seen by Moscow like a betrayal of the agreements. And the answer was that they went directly to Crimea. No, for a reminder, I mean, it's like there was in the Soviet Union there was a very complex political division. Crimea was part of the Russian Federation of the Soviet Union until 1954. Okay, so it was a Russian territory, a part of the Russian Republic of the USSR. It was a gift. It was a gift by Nikita Khrushchev to the Ukrainian people. No, that he decided in 1954. Nikita Khrushchev had a strong feelings towards Ukraine. He had grown up in Ukraine on a big part of his life, and he decided, I mean, like to give this kind of a gift, no, from Russia to Ukraine, a transfer that was not in line with the constitution of the USSR, and but altogether it was arranged that it would become an autonomous district or region of the Ukrainian Republic from 1954 to 1991. In that moment, at the end, I mean, even if I mean, there were not protests against it, it's just that there were some things, the things we can notice about who was not in favor of this. It was like there were some, I mean, a lot of procedures that didn't take place, I mean, regarding what it meant in that moment. Also, it's like obviously there were in the Russian side there were people that were not happy, but it didn't become a bigger issue, especially because it was all the Soviet Union at that moment, and nobody considered that at a certain moment, I mean, the Soviet Union would fall. No, so altogether, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Crimea already had declared unilateral independence in 1992. No, and Crimea, there was a constitution for Crimea between the Ukrainian authorities and Crimea. Already since the 1992, already the Russian parliament had already recognized that Crimea was Russia. There was a big vacuum of power in Russia in the 90s. There was a division in which the army, the parliament, and Boris Yeltsin and his oligarchs, what they were trying to control. So obviously, I mean, the parliament refused to accept that Crimea was not part of Russia, and it was a long. I mean, also after Yeltsin bombed the parliament in. But also after a long negotiation, it was finally accepted. There was a constitution for Crimea negotiated with Ukrainian authorities and an agreement with Russia for the Black Sea Fleet, because one of the main issues that was Crimea was fundamental for the security perspective of Russians, regarding because of in Sevastopol it was the host of the Black Sea Fleet. So there was an agreement in 1997 that it included a long-term lease for its facilities. No, at that moment, the ethnic composition of the peninsula it's around 61% Russians, 25% Ukrainians, and 11% Tatars. But it's all Russian. It's a Russian-speaking society, in general. No, it's like so. This is a little bit of this regarding also. Let's say that parallel after Crimea, the other thing that took after the situation in 2014, the new government in Ukraine, one of the first things it was to change the constitution to take out the neutrality clause. No, so once they took the neutrality clause, the Russian response was exactly. I mean, then let's remind that the neutrality clause was one of the points of the agreement to recognize Crimea and regarding the Black Sea Fleet. And so that when that disappeared, so obviously Russia, I mean, it's like they had an argument in which to say, if you don't respect agreements, then we need to assure, and that's how they proceed to occupy and annex Crimea, and that it became in a matter of weeks, very quickly operated politically in a referendum that was not recognized by the West. But it became part of the Russian Federation. Meanwhile, in the Donbass, we had a different situation, but still related to the main issues, because I mean the Donbass in the Donbass and Donetsk and Lugansk, people didn't want to separate. They didn't pretend like there was no strong Ukrainian identity, but it was more a local identity, and. Originally, the oligarchs had a big support over there, but it's also true that it's like there was no like this independent or separatist movement clearly in that sense. No, even though once the change of government and political orientation happened, there started to be some movement that try like to proceed to more autonomy, separation, to claim, and eventually they managed to organize groups of local insurgents with Russian support. And after a first phase of the conflict, I mean, we had a conflict in which this started in 2014 in a very irregular manner, let's say. It started in which they were taking different parts of the control of different parts of the region of the Donbass, the two regions of Donetsk and Lugansk. They occupy the capitals, the capital of Donetsk, the capital of Lugansk, and some of the cities. No, it was not even half of the, at that moment, not even half of the what it represents, but still it was representative because they had control of the capitals of each region, and that allowed them to have like certain political presence. No, so it's like at that moment the conflict, I mean, started to have an evolution from 2004. I mean, from 2014 and 2015, there were different phases of the conflict. I had the opportunity of being there in 2015 in January, I mean, there were some moments of intense fighting like around the airport, but at that moment, neither Ukraine wanted to have at that moment a complete, even though they were trying to recover and to engage in the area. Um, to recover it, but they were also worried about the possible answer from Russia that was obviously also involved. No, there were the Minsk agreements from 2000, the second round of the Minsk agreements, because we remember there were two rounds, and the thing is that the Minsk agreements included a lot of political reforms that were never carried out by Ukrainian, no? So Ukraine. So the thing is, we know now, now that we didn't know at the time, that's why, but we know now by Angela Merkel and Macron that the only thing they wanted from the Minsk agreements was to give more time to Ukraine, so Ukraine could arm themselves to eventually have a stronger army and be able of retaking by force their other territory. So that's why we can see that there was no intention of finding a peace with those agreements, even though the agreements certainly assured, the agreements between other things assured that, I mean, only some sort of autonomy for the Donetsk and Lugansk, but they will remain part of Ukraine. And there were a lot of issues that were considered that at the end they were not respected, no, in that sense. And obviously there was a lost opportunity for peace, no. So it's the idea was to have some negotiations directly with the rebels. There was instead one of the policies that adopted the government was complete Ukrainization at different levels in a country that, let's remind, has always been multilingual. Ukraine has always had a multilingual nature. I mean, it's not only, I mean, Russian and Ukrainian, well, Ukrainian and Russian, and we can also find minorities that speak Romanian, that speak Hungarian, plus Surshik, that is a kind of dialect that is like a mix of Russian and Ukrainian that is widely used in the center. So altogether, it seemed like there was no intention of trying to build a multicultural net in which there could be built a middle ground and find a political solution, no? Because it's like at the end, because there is another thing, and I will not get deep into that, but also to build an Ukrainian state, I mean, it will be very important to consider the multi-ethnic nature of its society, no? Because it's if not, it becomes very complicated. You cannot Ukrainize when half of the population speaks Russian, no, or use it for different means. So therefore, yeah, it's complicated, no. But that's another topic in which I mean that we can get further later if you want in the questions. Also, so these were the borders in February 9, 2022. So these were this was the situation regarding how already they became self-declared republics of Donetsk and Lugansk. They were controlling the territory in red. And until that moment, they were not recognized by Russia, and still Russia had. There was there was not so much faith already in the political agreements of the Minsk agreements of 2015, because they had been carried out some of the clauses. But even though in December 2021, Vladimir Putin threw a proposal to NATO to find some sort of political arrangement regarding Ukraine, but there was absolutely no response. So I mean, what happened, as we know, is the face of the conflict, because the conflict was already there and the war was already there since 2014. Just like the face, that kind of conflict completely changed, in which Russia openly already participated in a war against Ukraine. I mean, invaded Ukraine from different parts. I mean, it's from the northeast. It was a very complex military operation that has different phases. No, This is now what has changed until now. This is like the current, more or less the current map of the how is it now on we're talking January 2025. Let's say Russia has occupied most of the two regions that they, well, in the case of Lugansk, they already control more than 99%. In the case of Donetsk, around 75%, more 73, 75%. And then also they managed to occupy two regions in the south, the Kherson and Zaporizhia. No? So already in all that process, because the war was very complicated, has changed a lot in the way things have the evolution of the conflict has changed a lot, and also the political goals the have evidently changed. But what has happened is that officially, from the point of view of the Russian Federation, the four regions, the Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Lugansk, have become de jure, for de jure from the point of view of the Russian Federation, part of Russia. No, so that shows from a goal for them, that is to recover what they consider the territory. So during that conflict, because that is already, it will arrive to 3 years. We have seen many different. I don't know how are we the time, Pradip? We have time, yes, just to hello. Okay, well, I'll continue. I'll wait for the. The thing is that in this context, in this context that in which we find until now, we have a war that has been going on for almost 3 years. It's difficult to calculate the numbers, because every side gives you numbers that are very difficult to precise until what sense they are real or not. But we can see different moments of the war. The first moment in which Russia intended to arrive to Kiev and force a political negotiation, but they didn't manage to. In part thanks to NATO support, that is strong NATO military support to Ukraine, and that made Russia to change the typology of war, in which that they changed in a long-term war, in which Russia had the advantage, because Russia has the advantage, the biggest advantage in military power, men, population, etc. No, so it's let's remind that Russia has they don't have a full mobilization until now. Meanwhile, Ukraine has been struggling with the mobilization, in which they have to change even the age of mobilizing, so the mobilization of soldiers, until it was from 27 and forward. Now it's from 25 and forward, and there is strong pressure by the US to decrease that age, so 18 years old can be also mobilized. So altogether, and the fact is that in a long term, it was very difficult for Ukraine to resist with the NATO support. NATO, as the weeks pass, or the months pass, and the years pass, it has become completely dependent on NATO military support, and they cannot by themselves, sustain an ongoing war with Russia without the huge investment by NATO. No, it's like the United States only for 2024, we're talking about more than $60 billion. So, and if we count for all the war, it's already over $100 million. What has been given in aid by the United States, and that also we have to include all the money that has been received by the Ukraine from other countries, no, the UK, France, and Germany, but also other countries at different levels. What happened is that there are many worrisome things in this sense. First, that there is no this is some just to have in front of the main combat areas now. As of January 25, we have these areas, the Kursk region, because Kursk is in Russia, but Ukraine wanted to like a negotiation peace. They try to have an invade one part of the Kursk region, like to eventually negotiate with that area later on. But it has been a very complicated because it's like they have lost a lot of manpower regarding that invasion that was not profitable at the long term. This is the main features right now. The things that also we can notice, and before we start talking about what's happening, what are, about the possible peace agreements, some of the effects we have seen is like is that the U.S. have increased a lot the political influence they have in the EU members. At the end, they became completely dependent or of the Washington, and there was no possibility at all of having an independent foreign policy. No, so like. So as we mentioned earlier, Sweden and Finland, that they were historically neutral countries, they became members of NATO. There were very strong economic sanctions against Russia at different levels. But I mean, meanwhile, for the US, it was very comfortable and profitable to handle them. For Europe, it showed a counter effect, because it's like many countries in the European Union very linked. They had a strong attachment with economic attachment with Russia, not only by energetics but in different levels. So obviously, the fact of, I mean, reducing drastically the level of trade and economic interaction with Russia was very harsh for many countries that had to accept U.S. interest foreign policy. I mean, it's like that was going against their own interest, no? So the other funny thing is like the opposition to the war in Europe. It's mainly foreseen by the extreme right parties and only a small percentage of the left. So then it's like. Yeah, there's not a huge opposition. I mean, but the mainstream media, there was a huge like discourse in terms of continue military support and more guns and more war, but there was no intent of finding a political and a dialogue and peace agreement. So at the end, it's like who benefits from the conflict, and this is like, I think, the main three winners at different levels. Um, for the US, they are the the benefactor, because why? They are trying to debilitate, and they are managing until a little bit to debilitate Russia, one of their main geopolitical rivals. Meanwhile, they are not exposing their soldiers, they are not exposing their population, they are not having a completely economic impact against them as other countries. So for them, it's like, and they have forced uh, all European countries to follow without doubt. I mean, whatever the Washington wants to do in the region. So it's like, and they even acquired two more NATO members. No, so for them, it's like, and not only that, it's like they are increasing the military support. I mean, the military industry in the U.S. have increased exponentially their gains between all the weapons they're giving and the possibility of testing a lot of military armament that was not possible to use before. So for them, it's like it's all like it's a win-win situation. The thing is like that also has created some problems in the U.S. because it's a lot of spending that is not clear until what time all the money that are given to Ukraine they are giving to Ukraine, they will get it back eventually. No, so like. But I mean, and that has created also some resistance, as we can see in some sectors of the Conservative Party. I mean, like that are against the giving continuing military support in Ukraine. But still, in the global level, until now, I mean, U.S. can be another big win indirectly is for China, because China, well, by not participating, and that allowed them to, yes, they closed the economic link with Russia, but I mean, without giving directly military support. And that allows it to him to make Russia more dependent on the alliance with China. And China, even though there is a forthcoming confrontation with the US in many different reasons, it's still, I mean, in others, it remains open. No? So it's like, so altogether, altogether, yeah, for China it was a big winner, no? Because it's like China profited also meanwhile to become a negotiator in the Middle East to strengthen our alliances with Saudi Arabia, with other countries, and the position of China. I mean, it was like a very convenient for them because it's like by staying in the middle and like even though they can be sympathetic to the Russian position regarding the conflict in Ukraine, but they are not like openly giving any kind of military support. So that's like, and that remains to have to let's say have a certain more neutrality that more countries claim to have. And the other big benefactor is also, I mean, a different and a smaller level is Turkey, because Turkey remained a breach in which there were like they were, yes, they are NATO member, but they also have talks with Putin. Let's remember the Istanbul agreements, of which we will talk a little bit later, were over there in in Istanbul, thanks to the proposal of Erdogan, and altogether, Turkey has benefited a lot in the fact that when the exchange is closed between Russia and the West, Turkey has been playing the role of bridge, and that has been very convenient with them. And so it's like so they allow themselves to have military agreements with both sides, they to have economic sides with both sides, and like so therefore. Turkey has taken also a lot of benefit from what's happening. You know, who loses more? Well, I mean, obviously Ukraine in the first side, the first case, because Ukraine, no matter what the outcome will be, I mean, the country will be in a very critical situation, economic situation, in which many of the people, I mean, millions of people have left Ukraine, hundreds of thousands of people have died. So mostly men, what means that most of the workforce will be gone. They will be in a very dependent position, either with Russia or with the West or whatever the outcome is, but they will be in an extremely dependent position that won't allow them to have like any kind of real sovereignty, you know. So it's like so it's whatever happens. I mean, it's like the position of Ukraine. It's like it's a tragedy in the sense that like there's no good outcome for them. It's like they have to build a state in which people feel identified on, and like and to have to get out of an economic situation that they will have after the war, that it will be critical, and we don't know in which context that will happen. No? For Russia, even if they may have some tactical or local strategic wins in the military point of view, and even if they would manage to maintain the four territories that they want, or to assure that some sort of neutrality for Ukraine, the thing is that the political cost was too much, and that will weaken Russia first in many senses. It will complicate to reorganize the relationships with the EU, with Europe in general, with the West, but also will make them a lot more dependent with China. No? So it's like that's why it will be more like a Pyrrhic victory if they manage to, but still we have to know, because I mean many things can happen in this sense, and therefore for them the political cost regarding the sanctions or regarding the economic impact, it's harsh. How much it will be, we will know also after this is finished. And also for the EU, it's a great tragedy, because it's like they lost the possibility to have again to have a foreign policy independent from the United States, to be a political actor that counts, that real count. They have been just following, like they have been doing for many issues around the world. They have the EU has a lot of presence, and obviously while other parts of the nodal points of the world are moving somewhere else, the EU has a lot of capacity. Also, let's not forget that the impact of the sanctions, it's a lot. That also the counter sanctions of them, because meanwhile, by one side, the US can certainly stand without no problem the reducing or the trade and commercial agreements with Russia. For the EU, it's a huge impact. We have seen now that only since yesterday already, Ukraine is not used anymore for gas transit. So many countries will suffer because of that. Because it's, and not only in the energetic sphere. No, the sanctions against Russia have brought a lot of weight regarding tourism and regarding other areas in which they used to interact a lot. The many members of the EU and Russia. No. So. Yeah, I mean, we mentioned already this, about the political influence of the United States. Well, yeah, already I mentioned this one. So lost opportunities for peace. So what? Because it's it's important to consider also that we have lost a lot of opportunities to find a political settlement that could have avoided the conflict. No. Already, there was a promise not to expand NATO to Gorbachev in 1990 by the Bush administration, and it was not respected. We had already the Minsk agreements in 2015, and they were not respected. There was this proposal by Putin on the measures to ensure the security of the Russian Federation and members of state of the North Atlantic of NATO, and there was not even intention of to have a negotiation, to have an agreement or something. There was already an agreement when the conflict started in March 2024. After 1 month of war, there was an agreement between Russia and Ukraine to finish the conflict. So only some details to be defined. And the thing is that that was all wasted, because at that moment, when there was almost close an agreement to finish that war, at the moment, Boris Johnson arrived to Kiev and said, convinced Zelensky that if he was going to he could withstand with NATO military support and to throw the agreement away. So it was and that agreement would eventually have allowed the possibility of Ukraine of maintaining Donetsk and Lugansk. No, so altogether there were some opportunities, and let's not to say that it's and what should be more worrisome until now is the fact that we're seeing clearly. I mean, before Trump, any political will in it, especially in the West, to sit on the negotiation table and to say, okay, let's find a political agreement, let's finish this carnage, because at the end the war has brought a terrible toll for the populations that are suffering, for all the people that are in the areas nearby, and for the soldiers that are fighting, and for obviously for all the people that are losing near ones. And the war is always a tragedy, and it's very sad that we are not seeing the will to find the political proposals. Nobody in the West, and the small voices that have tried to them are immediately criticized, and we have only seen proposals for peace from countries that are outside the Axis NATO Moscow, like from Latin America or in India or in other countries that they have put more into finding some sort of political negotiation instead of polarizing the conflict. And meanwhile, the Biden administration has been very sad in that sense, because they have not shown any political will. They have just succumbed to the will of the neocons in the government to continue to give military support, and even escalating the conflict. We continue to give more and more military support without a plan of what they wanted to do with it. So it's so that's why that has allowed, altogether, that, for example, it brought an opportunity for the BRICS. It can represent, in the sense that they present themselves as an alternative. Yes, of course, they cannot contrast in the military sense, but still, in the political sense, in a long term, they could present as an option that not everything has to be aligned in a Moscow-Washington alliance. So it's there's other options, and that's why the potential for the BRICS is huge in what it can represent, not only about trade and economic issues, but also because it's the potential of symbolically mean a new kind of no aligned or different aligned or multipolar, no? Because at the end it's one of the issues, because it's like it's and let's not forget that also, yes, Russia is part of BRICS, but it's like one of the main features is that they signal the need for a multipolarity, no? So it's like this is like the thing. It's like multipolarity doesn't mean to be pro-US or pro-China, or it's like just to understand and to accept that there are different countries with a strong presence, and the part of trying to impose hegemony from one country, it's not viable, and the US is no longer in the position, they are not longer in the 90s to sustain the try to impose a global hegemony like they were doing in the 90s, no? So that's why I think it's I mean, the Middle East the same, and also like and for Latin America. So where is it going, the conflict? I mean, this is like the two extreme options, no? So like in the sense of how extreme, in the sense that the one in the left is like I mean, both of them idealistic for depending on the side. Some like for some nationalist Russians that would like to have all the south of Ukraine like part of what they would call like Novorussia, no, but it's like, or instead Ukrainian that would like to have the territorial integrity they had in 2013. No? So it's like I mean, those both scenarios seem out of touch, out of reality, and that's why it's necessary to understand, to find a political agreement, political settlement that stops already the conflict. You know? So where's this like before, like you're already to conclude, like almost. There are some questions that we will. I mean, it's important to be that we will need to know regarding the Trump's presidency. So it's like. What will happen with the military support to Ukraine? Will be reduced or cut in a certain way or not? Because we have seen, even if they have signaled they may do it, I mean, Trump is a very contradictory person, is like in many senses. And also the future cabinet members, we can see a big sort of different personalities, and not all of them have the same position regarding the conflict in Ukraine. So it's like we have to wait and see what effectively it will mean, if they will reduce the amount of support that they are giving, or we will see something different. No, so it's like, oh, it was only part of the campaign speech that they wanted to reduce the money to Ukraine. Will the U.S. relationship with NATO suffer any changes? That's also a big question. Until what point it will be modified or not? I mean, it's something we have to see. So, and it's one of the main questions we will have to follow, no? Because at the end, from the cabinet members' future, there are different perspectives and positions among them. And so it's like, and Trump said different things. So we have to wait until that to consider what happened and what approach is being considered towards Russia and China. No, in fact, but more or less, I mean, even though if Trump has a very aggressive stance toward China, still we don't know until what point. I mean, if it will escalate until a war in Taiwan, or it will only be on a trade level, etc. So this is some of the questions. It will be interesting to have an answer that we will have more signals in the next 3 weeks after Trump's term starts. And what to be considered when, and this is the main issue. So it's like when there will be a negotiation, the main issue is what will happen in NATO membership. Russia wants to assure that Ukraine won't be part of NATO. They don't want to just to delay or have it for later. And so what will happen with the NATO status? What will happen? So that will have to go in line with some security arrangements. The Istanbul Agreement already has some sort of security agreements by some countries that could be a combination of France, Germany, China, and Russia, and to have some sort of security arrangements in the case that there was assured that Ukraine would become a neutral country and with no perspective of NATO membership. There has to be an agreement regarding the territorial agreement regarding these 4 regions. Even though if Russia says they want the 4 regions, I mean they don't specify exactly what it would mean geographically. So I think there's still a space for negotiation over there, and Also, another thing is like future size and equipment of the Ukrainian armed forces. That was also part of the Istanbul agreements, and the status of Russian language in Ukraine. I mean, those are part of the things that may be considered in I mean, in that order, because at the end, the first two are the most important one. There was agreement in the first two in the Istanbul agreements, and then the difference is that from the Istanbul agreements of March 2022 until now, it's been already 3 years. So it's already very different, no, the situation. So obviously, so the other thing is what will happen if the military support to Ukraine will be cut or reduced by the US. What will be the reaction of the other countries and the other, for example, mostly the UK and France, that they have signaled that they would like to continue supporting even more Ukraine. The thing is, like, until what it is sustainable, that possibility. In the case of France, it's very difficult because Macron doesn't have even control of the parliament. He has a very low political support right now, and to try to gamble with increasing military aid for Ukraine will be like very costly for him. In Germany, we have elections in the next weeks, and that will be also crucial to see what can happen regarding European position. And even if the UK continues to give a strong military support, it's not in the numbers that could mean or determine the future of the conflict. No, so at the end, if with all the support that until now the West has given to Ukraine, that has not changed the outcome of what they were expecting, it's difficult to think that without the US, I mean, it's like they could manage to. That will bring also, so even if either force possibility to, for example, to Ukraine to have some sort of negotiations, but also to make create some sort of very more unstable situation in Ukraine in the near future. No, so it's like this is also, so I mean, I will be open. So Pradeep and the others, I'm open to your questions and doubts, or to precise anything more if you want. So please let me know, and thank you for your attention. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rolando Drummond. Thank you so much for your detailed analysis. Now, Prakash, if you were there, can you please put the questions here if there are any questions already? In the meantime, I can put my two
Okay.
questions.
Okay.
One is that do you think that the Security Council has demonstrated a very, very poor role in this 10-year-long war? And the ideal of collective security, on the basis of which the UNO was formed, the expected role of the Security Council in instituting peacekeeping operations in different areas of conflict, that has also been very much that has been proved to be a failure, a disaster. And do you think that the Security Council still now, is there a chance that the Security Council can come forward to stop this disastrous war? That is my first question.
Mm-hmm.
And the second question is that the question of ideology.
Mm-hmm.
If, it were Soviet Union instead of Russian Federation. We know that it could be a situation where ideology would play a very crucial role. Uh, Whereas European Union is very much guided by capitalist ideology of capitalism, and Soviet Union was directed by ideology of Marxism or socialism. Then this type of situation was a common affair, and we know that after 1945, after the Second World War, the Cold War situation uh, persisted for quite some time, and the two superpowers played a very significant role in escalating the Cold War situation. But today we are talking about multipolarism. We know there is no two superpowers today. There is only one superpower, USA, for which reason it is often called a monopolar world. Again, people talk about multipolarism because of the rise of Germany, the rise of European Union, the rise of China, the presence of Russia. For all these reasons, uh, it is a multipolar world. And how will you distinguish between the situation of the bipolar world
Mhm.
where Cold War prevailed and the and today's multipolar world? What is how will you distinguish between the two situations? Is there any qualitative change between these two perspectives,
Okay.
placing Ukraine war in the in consideration?
Okay. No, but very good question. Okay, so well, first, I will answer first regarding the Security Council. I mean, obviously, there has it has very mentioned and from by many different countries. It's needed a reform of the Security Council. The original way it was defined, the Security Council. I mean, it's outdated. It has no sense that the UK is there with a veto and India it isn't. For example, for instance, considering what it represents today, and just that's just to give an example, no. So it's like it's the basis of what is the Security Council and the veto members has a lot of colonial, let's say, heritage in there. I mean, you have France and you have the UK that they have a very reduced population comparing of the weight of could be having by Brazil, by India, or by other countries. So it's like that mentioned that yes, of course, there's a real need for change in that sense, that has to be representative of how the world is working right now. So it's like, and also it has to give an. I mean, I think there are the elements in the UN Charter that have to be recognized. Is like the goals, the possibility to make it work, but still there needs to be more political ambition and to force more the change. So it's not a hostage, but in the practical, the UN becomes it cannot do anything because of the vetoes of some countries, but also because it does not own the mechanisms. It doesn't have to be the police of the world because it's not its goal to be the police of the world, but it has to be an an institution that allows some conflict resolution in a more efficacious way, so with more efficacy. So it's like altogether, I think there is a need for reform, but also there is a space in which many things, like we can see sometimes that window of opportunity that it presents over there. But also there has to be, the US has to understand that they cannot, for them to try to maintain global hegemony, it's not sustainable, and it's not sustainable, and that will lead to chaos. And there needs to be a new understanding of what multipolarity means, and obviously any arrangement regarding global security has to include the US, Russia, China, and India, among other main countries. No, and it's not only those, but it's like, but those so to set the base for a different kind of political relations, and to avoid conflicts, because if not, it's very risky, the possibility to have more escalations and have more wars, and nobody wants that. So it's like, I think it's very costly. I mean, Ukraine now is losing a lot of generations of people. I mean, there's like hundreds of thousands of people that they have lost, and for them it's a huge impact. No, so the impact for them is terrible. So it's like, and it was a war that it was possible to avoid. I think, yes, the Security Council, it needs to be reformed, and it could have a bit more important role. And it's like, it's up to the members. I mean, like to push for that change. No, regarding the other question, I mean, I think it's a very good question. The second one, first of all, I mean, regarding the ideological part, because the ideological, there's always, I mean, even in the US, it's not out. I mean, even after the fall of the Soviet Union, the US maintains a huge ideological portrayal of their actions. No, so it's like it's they always try to play the cowboys and play it like we are the good guys and the others are the bad guys, and like to trying to find some sort of moral. It's not about let's say capitalism versus socialism, but it's more like okay, like the Western liberal values, like the hegemon, our Western, from the point of view of the US, to say our Western values are the best, so you have to copy them and imitate them, because that's your possibility to become something. No, that's what they want to like to project and to portray to different parts of the world. But also, it's important to notice that even in the Cold War or today, besides the ideological part, the geopolitical component was always present. And the geopolitical component, what does it mean? That superpowers, they think in terms of territory. They think in terms of territory, in terms of what's like how to project their influence to the neighbors and to us. And we could see a lot of examples in the Cold War in which they would play alliances with countries that were not ideological similars, for example. No, so it's like so how many, for example, how many alliances had the Soviet Union with Middle East countries, for example, that were not aligned in the same ideological way? Or how many alliances the US had with the most fearful dictatorships in Latin America, for example, in Chile and Argentina, or like or even today with Saudi Arabia. No, at the end, it's like sometimes the geopolitical component of the alliance it's become more important. It is more important than the ideological part. So it's like in that sense, the geopolitical component was always present, and therefore Ukrainians' tragedy is that they're in the middle of a geopolitical struggle, but for centuries they were invaded by Mongols, by Tatars, by Polish, by Germans, by everybody. No, so so they were in the middle of that situation, that like either with or without the ideological component, their geographical position, that it's they, instead of benefiting from that, they became the victims of a struggle between all the surrounding powers. Meanwhile, they haven't been able to build a state, a sovereign state of their own, in which, let's say, let's play with our neutrality, like Turkey does, for example. Like Turkey, that, for example, managed to say we are neutral, we are in the middle, but we are balanced. No, Ukraine hasn't been able to create that solid political entity in which they defend their autonomy, and because they have been, unfortunately, they have been ruled by corrupt oligarchs that they sell themselves to who pays more. No, who pays more? First, the Russians paid more. Now the West pays more. But at the end, they're not caring about the local interest. If they were interested of caring about the local population, there will be a ceasefire, because nobody wants a war in your country for 3 years. There's no benefit to be thinking that they can win the conflict, and instead they are just interested in getting more money and more money from NATO and more money from Western support, and that doesn't give like the possibility of finding a political arrangement. And it's very sad because they are not putting forward the interest of finding a political settlement and of the Ukrainian people. So I think the ideological part is always present in it's only the ideology changes after the Cold War. I mean, they tried to sell us that first there was the end of history, when you don't remember that in the 90s that they were saying, okay, so it's like and it's like like if it were the triumph of liberalism and capitalism, but still we can see that it's not, of course, it's not that way, and the same contradictions that were part of the capitalism are present. It's just like in that capitalism logic, in a global capitalism logic, there are blocks and their interests and their geopolitical interests, and obviously each one will try to present themselves because I am the good guy. I have the moral upground, because the same way the US tries to portray themselves as we are the good guys, the Christian values that guide society, also Russia sells themselves like we have the high ground, the moral high ground, because from the perspective, they are like the Orthodox have like the higher moral high ground. So it's a matter of interpretation, how you want to build. And there are many possibilities to build a proper ideology. Every country tries to create a narrative, because at the end you need to create a narrative to make sustainable your regime. And like that, of course, I mean, as you know, ideology is always a cover. No, ideology is a cover for what is like for what's happening in the inside. No, so yeah, I think there's a change of how the ideology works, but still there is always ideology, and the geopolitical component has been always present with different phases. Let's see. No? So that's I don't know if that I hope that answers your question, Pradeep.
And one thing more, that once I was trying to point out that once Russia was the major constituent republic of Soviet Union, among the 15 republics, and Ukraine was also one among them. And the ideological prevalence of socialism very much persisted for nearly, say, 70-75 years. Now, in addition to that, there is some cultural similarities also between Ukrainian people and Russian people. And how will we explain that Russia and Ukraine are now fighting, killing each other's people, and once they belong to the same country, and a strong ideological bond integrated them, bound them together. Now, this influence of ideology has totally disappeared in both Russia and Ukraine. What do you think about this?
Well, I mean, it's a fact that both people, Ukrainians and Russians, have a very close cultural link. No, let's remember only that Kiev was the first capital of Russia. No, so and they have a very, very strong cultural link. The languages are similar, not the same, of course, but they are similar. They're close. For many years, before the Soviet Union, I mean, it's like before the Soviet Union, Ukraine asked to be part of Russia. They were not during the Tsarist times. They were not conquered by Russia. They asked to be part of Russia, to be protected from the Polish, because they had just gained their independence from the Polish, and they asked to be independent, the past part of Russia. No, so like altogether, there was always a very cultural link close. The languages, it's the norm that there were two languages in the southeast. In the cities, Russian was spoken or is spoken, and in the countryside, Ukrainian was more used. And it was a multilinguistic society. It was extremely close at the level of languages and the culture. Both were Orthodox. Both were until recently mostly following the Moscow Patriarch of the Orthodox Church. So, and during the Soviet Union, there was, in all the Soviet Union, there was a lot of social movement and traveling. So it was very common that you would be born in Kiev and study in Yekaterinburg in Russia, and maybe then move and have married with someone from the south in Odessa. And so there was a very social movement, huge. So there was a huge bonds. So it's very common to have relatives everywhere in the former Soviet Union, because people was used to travel a lot. No, it was very easy to travel. It was cheap. It was affordable. So there was a huge social interaction with the languages, with the language, and with everything. So that what created a very, not only by the ideological part. I mean, it's like, because there were features that some people liked, but it was beyond the ideological part. It was the fact of like getting to recognize each other as part of the whole. You know, the Soviets created this concept in which they work a lot, that it was called the friendship of the people, because it's very difficult to build a society, in a multicultural society, in which everybody feels recognized. And they really wanted to make everybody, the Georgians, the Armenians, the Belarusians, the Ukrainians, the Russians, the Tatars, so all the dozens of nationalities they have inside, they want to be proud of each one. So it was always underlined. It's like you could do the school in the language you want, in your own language. So that was like a way of recognizing this multicultural tissue. Altogether, that was very, very important, and that created a bond. That obviously it was difficult to break it immediately. No, unfortunately, these bonds, even though they persist, because until now it persists, because now there are still many Ukrainians living in Russia and many Russians living in Ukraine. That it's a fact. The political context forced this war that is not wanted at all by locals, because nobody wants, like if you it's like a very close relative to which you have to fight, and it's like it's not wanted, because nobody wants this kind of conflict. I mean, is the geopolitical context that forced, I mean, like what that was explained before, that to this stance. But obviously it's difficult to swallow. It's very difficult to swallow for the people that have lived there for generations and have interacted there. Is like because it's very complicated. No, but like, for example, if you are a Russian that has lived in Ukraine for 20 years or 25 years, what happens with you? Or the opposite? No, it's like suddenly you are seen like the enemy. No, the betrayal. And it makes you like happen in many other countries at war, when and we don't know, and that will be very complicated to know what will happen after the war, how, if it's possible until a certain point, to repair the level of the social tissue at that sense. Because it's like yes, I think many people that grew up with this idea of the friendship of the people, for them it was absurd, the idea of thinking that there would be like especially between those two, because those were the closest. That was the closest link of all the 15 republics. The closest link of all was Russia and Ukraine, because of all the cultural historical bond. So yeah, it's a very sad thing, and it's like and I think but part of it starts to be by recognizing, and Ukraine has to, because recognize the multilinguistic, multicultural part of the tissue of their society. Because it's like if they want to Ukrainize, or they start with draconian laws proposed by the extreme right of forbidding Russian language. I mean, they have done that already in many senses, and forbid everything that relates to Russia. It's one thing is the political thing, and one other thing is the cultural. So it's like, and that creates, that polarizes and the society even more, and creates like some sort of different levels, because Russian speaking Ukrainians are not less than Ukrainian speaking Ukrainians, no. So it's like they simply speak the other language, no. So you cannot categorize them like because of the language they speak, because it's a language they have spoken for centuries also, no. So it's a very complex issue, and yeah, it's, of course, it's sad. I mean, the perspective, and we don't know what will be the outcome in that sense, what kind of Ukraine we will see, because I don't exclude neither like some sort of strong political changement inside Ukraine after that, because we don't know at the inside what happens. We don't know a lot of what's happening inside Ukraine politically, because there's no visible opposition, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, no. So let's see, no.
Thank you so much, Prakash. Here is a question from Prakash Chakraborty. Is this the beginning of the end of the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think it is quite possible that once, I mean, that once Trump assumes power in January, in 3 weeks, we will see in a medium term a change in the typology of the conflict. That what does it mean? That is, if effectively the military support to Ukraine is reduced, that will force Ukraine either to negotiate, no, maybe they will resist a little bit more because the military aid they have can last for some months, but by the end of spring or beginning of summer, they will be forced to negotiate or to depend completely in the Western support. But it's not sustainable to depend only in the support from France and the UK or eventually Germany. Therefore, that will force them to negotiate some sort of an agreement. If not, it's not excludable that there could be some sort of change in the military, in the government in Ukraine, because it's like I suppose that inside it's expectable that even if we don't see it inside the government and mostly in the military side, there are the ones that want to negotiate and the ones that want to continue fighting. No, so we don't see that because they won't show that data, but it's expectable that there are two positions, and that eventually, if they see that it's not sustainable, the military position, and they're having loss after loss after loss in the field, they could pressure eventually Zelensky to resign or to have some sort of change in the regime. Nevertheless, even if that happens, and that's also this playing also with the hypothesis, no, but it's like it's possible that not everybody in the army could accept a ceasefire or a political agreement so that would change the conflict into some sort of local conflicts or some sort of partisan warfare. No, that would be very different from the kind of war we have until now. So in which there is an institutional acceptance of the ceasefire, but not a real acceptance that allows different kinds of partisan warfare in different areas, and while the situation is resolved. So it's like, but I think altogether that it's expected that if at least Trump says, I mean, the Trump's administration does half of what he pretends regarding the reducing support, that will see like open the possibility of changing the type of conflict, and maybe induce some sort of political solution at the end of the war by the middle of 2025. Well, let's see.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor.
Prakash, is there any other question? Prakash, any other question?
No.
Okay.
Participation. Thank you, Professor Pradeep Bishnu, and today's speaker. Thank you to all.
Okay.
Today's lecture right now.
Thank you, Dr. Rolando. Very much thank you for your time, for your brilliant discussion. Uh, this will be uploaded on YouTube
Mhm.
very soon, and then I will again send you the link. And thank
Okay.
you, everybody in the audience, and thank you, Rashtrabigyan Chorcha Kendra.
Okay. Thank you very much for everybody. Thank you,
Good.
Pradeep and Pranesh for organizing. I'm glad to be with you. So it's like, so thank you for everything. Okay.
Thank you.